All right, Dr. Nathan. Hey, thanks for joining me again. I think this is podcast number 3 together, and this is about your new book, which I joked with you and said it's as big as a Bible here, which is titled The Sensitive Patient's Healing Guide, which I think is a um, very simple but eloquent title to a very complex world that we're living in. I mean, even since the last time you and I talked, things have gotten more complicated, more tricky, more sensitivities. I mean, it's pretty nuts. And you describe in this book how in the 80s you hardly saw anyone that had sensitivities, or possibly that you were not aware of it. And your awareness increased in the 90s and then the 2000s. And then now it seems like we're exponentially. I mean, based on the way I read your book and the way your practice evolved over the decades, I mean, I'm estimating it sounds like 100 times more sensitive people than when you were starting out.
I would put it at higher than that. I think we're seeing an epidemic of sensitivity now, which is related to just the toxicity of the world we live in, that a lot of the people who are responsible for this world aren't owning up to. So I think patients are, um, all of us, are being exposed to heavy metals, chemicals of all types, EMF, and I just don't think we're aware of what's in our world.
Yeah. Have you ever read the book by John Muir called My First Summer in the Sierra?
No, I'm familiar with John Muir, but I have not read that book.
So that book, it makes me, number one, it kind of makes me want to go back. I know there was some hard things about the life back then, but this was published, I think it was 1911 when it first got published, and you would absolutely love it. But basically, John Muir, it's his first summer in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and he's sleeping under pine trees and talking about all the flora and the fauna. And I thought, my God, if we could just get people to live like that for a month, I wonder how much of their sensitivities, their chronic issues would go away. Because when you look at everything you're writing about, Lyme, Bartonella, Babesia, chronic fatigue syndrome, mast cell activation, histamine intolerance, all of these issues in a way related to mold and mycotoxins as well. All of these issues are a result of us being exposed to new toxins, new pathogens. In fact, you write here in one section that there's 350,000 chemicals, somewhere in the ballpark of 350,000 chemicals out there, and only a small percentage have even been studied or tested for safety, right?
Absolutely. Um, so John Muir did, in his own way, I can't say he discovered Yosemite, but he popularized it. Have you been to Yosemite?
I haven't. You know, that's crazy because I lived in Vegas. My mom should have drove me out there when I was a kid.
Um, Yosemite is a magical place. It kind of gets overrun by tourists in the summer, but that doesn't change. But if you can go there before school is out or in September and don't catch an early snowfall, it's absolutely drop dead gorgeous. Views are wonderful. You can understand how John Muir felt about it, and I think his work got Ansel Adams to photograph it, and that led to Yosemite becoming a national park. So I
Yeah.
imagine I would like that book.
Yeah, you definitely put it on your list, and I think you will, possibly fantasize about going, 100 years back in time. Because what I'm looking at now, especially for me as a father of 3 young kids, I'm like, man, how do I even guarantee, or is it even possible to guarantee their health in this world? It seems like it's getting more complicated, even in the last 8 years since my kids were born.
It's very scary as a father and grandfather. I mean, I'm old. I've had a wonderful life, but what world am I leaving to my children and grandchildren? And we need to all understand this so we can turn this around. And we don't have time to have a 20-year study funded by the federal government. Uh, it's obvious to people who are studying this that we already need to have something done immediately. It's not something to be talked about, it's something to be fixed.
What would your biggest priority be? I mean, I think just after we spent several hours talking together, doing interviews together. I've read your book. I've implemented a lot of things that you've taught me through your books and through your work. I mean, it sounds like to me mold is like your biggest smoking gun for people, because we're in a society now where 95% of the time is spent indoors, where just in your father's life, my grandfather's life, 95% of the time was outdoors. It was out on the farm. It was away. Even if the old farmhouse was moldy, it didn't necessarily matter because they were away from it so much and the air was so leaky in those houses. It wasn't like today.
Well, I would answer your question in two ways. First, for patients, um, the priority would be, if you've not been well, really find someone who knows what they're doing so that they can look at what is triggering your illness. That is not likely, sad to say, in the current medical system. So they don't have the time to really delve into it, or be able to talk to you long enough to really get a handle of what's really wrong with you. So you need to find someone in the functional or integrative world if you're going to get any help at all. Now, as a planet, my first statement would be, I think we need a moratorium on all new chemicals being limited unless they can prove safety and really do the studies that need to be done. And at some point, we need to figure out, um, demand that every new chemical that's come on the market prove its safety before its use can be renewed. We It just seems to me necessary. Is this economically viable? Would this be hard on people? Absolutely. Do we need that? Absolutely.
You know, what's crazy. Have you looked at the rate of onset? So the age of onset in a period in females, I believe in the 1860s, it was somewhere around 15 and a half to 16 years of age when a woman began her menstrual cycle. Now, the latest papers I could read, it's somewhere in the ballpark of 9 years old. I'm just curious, how much of a role do you think it's chemicals and mycotoxins creating the estrogenic effect in these young girls?
I think it's huge. Again, it isn't being taken seriously. Like, we know that this is not a statistic that is coming out of nowhere. This has been well documented. We're seeing girls at 8 years old developing breasts. Um, Never seen that before. So the xenoestrogens, which are the chemicals in our environment that look to the body like estrogen, are really messing with our whole hormonal balance system. And again, that's a great example of what we're kind of talking about here in terms of what we're getting exposed to. Mold toxicity will do it as well. It will mess with the pituitary's ability to regulate all of the main hormones in the body. And a particular mold toxin, zearalenone, has estrogenic effects. So it will particularly affect people's ability to regulate that hormone.
And we see this all the time on mycotoxin screens. It's very common to see it. And also, a lot of times, we'll see the fusarium that's colonized on the mosaic organic acids test. And I'll talk with these young girls, and they're fully developed at 12 years old. And so I can't say necessarily causation, but I've seen a lot of these young females having issues with menstrual problems. They end up anemic because they're having heavy bleeding. And then we look back, and almost all of them have mold. The crazy thing for me has been, since the last time you and I talked, I've probably tested it at least a few hundred females with oat and with myco. And I'm seeing now the generational toxicity of the 12-year-old daughter, the 40-year-old mother, the 70-year-old grandmother. And I'm seeing the mycotoxins through the entire family. Have you ever thought about this idea of like a mental illness when people say, my family has mental illness, that it's really just toxicity going through placenta, through breast milk over these generations?
Absolutely possible. Um, we see these generational issues. They're not rare. Um, and whether it's passed on through the placenta when the mother got pregnant, if she had mold toxicity, or um, they're all living in the same moldy environment, um, whether grandma's house is moldy or mom's house is moldy, or somewhere along the line, this whole family is being exposed and predisposed. So Yeah, I mean, all of these are very important points here.
So here's a controversial question, and I can't come up with a good answer myself, but binders during pregnancy. This is something I get questioned about all the time. And I don't know what the right answer is because we know in the microplastic studies, these toxins, heavy metals, chemicals, pesticides, we know pretty much everything is being shared with the baby, including mycotoxins. I've seen 1 year old babies absolutely off the chart with ochratoxin and other mycotoxins. And so the mom said, well, should I have done binders during pregnancy? My thought is that you could grab onto some toxicity and therefore excrete some out of the bowels. I don't see how a binder would potentially make a baby more toxic, but I just don't understand the biochemistry enough, I guess, to recommend it. What can you say about this?
I don't think there's a question at all. If a mother is has mold toxicity, she needs to take binders during pregnancy. Now, we've discussed this. I think you know, Evan, that I have a mentorship program in which I'm teaching over 200 physicians how to do this complicated form of treatment that so many patients need. And we've talked about this, and as I would say, it's unanimous that the risk of not treating a woman who had mold toxicity during pregnancy is far outweighed by any potential risk. A number of us have helped women through the pregnancy, giving them binders, and they and the baby have done very well. I've had not a single patient have any difficulty with it. So, simple answer from my perspective, should a
Cool.
woman who's pregnant and has mold toxicity take binders? Absolutely. Now, some of the prescription binders like Welchol or cholestyramine, that's more in question. But you can absolutely safely give chlorella, charcoal, clay, and Saccharomyces boulardii, which will bind the vast majority of toxins. So I think that's, forgive me, it's kind of a no-brainer, which is,
Cool.
okay, am I going to leave my patient and the baby exposed to toxins, or am I going to do my best to minimize that exposure?
Love it. I appreciate that answer. I guess it's probably just a cover your ass policy, but as you know, on some of these manufacturers' labels for the binders, it'll say do not use while pregnant or nursing. And there's this big old label. And so if I go to
Right.
recommend that, I end up getting an inbox full of replies. Why are you telling me this when it says do not use on the label?
I think that's the lawyers for the people making the supplement CYA in like, well, if something happened, I can't be responsible for that. But the flip side is, if you don't take it, um, we're dealing with a potentially toxic baby. And there are well documented reports in the medical literature before we knew all of this of uh, women who had documented mold toxicity giving birth to infants that were really sick and even died.
Yeah, I believe it. I wanted to ask what kind of manifestations would you see? Would it be low birth weight? Are you thinking birth defects? Like, I mean, there is some teratogenic properties to these mycotoxins on an unborn baby, right?
Right. I'm sorry I don't have an immediate access to it. Um, I'm blanking on his name. He was a toxicologist in Sacramento. His name was Jack. Can't remember his last name. Published a whole bunch of papers on um, these children that were born that had been exposed to toxins. So I don't have the exact data, but I know I have seen it somewhere along the line.
That's okay. Yeah, I believe it. And we've seen a lot. I had one case up in Pennsylvania, a woman who had 6 kids. She lived in mold the entire time. She had tree roots that busted through her foundation. Every time it rained, she had water in the basement. All 6 kids were sick. Kids are behaviorally challenged. They're getting kicked out of school. They're biting, they're hitting, they have rage, they have anger. It's crazy. And we measured their oat test. And as you can imagine, it was an absolute mess. I'll pull it up here just for fun for people because this is really some of the data that people are not getting. And unfortunately, I wish your MD down the street would run this for you, but most of the time they won't. And some of them have even made fun of me for doing this, saying, "What the heck is this crap?" And
Don't feel bad. You're not being singled out. I
okay,
believe my name has been taken in vain more than a few times by conventional physicians who have no knowledge of this. but feel perfectly comfortable commenting on it from their lack of knowledge about this whole subject.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so
Okay.
here was one case here. This was an oat test that we did. This was a 3-year-old little boy. And just for folks looking, this is an at-home urine test. You wake up, it's a fasted urine. You can see here he had several aspergillinous colonization markers just completely off the chart. His candida was elevated sky high as well. I believe he had some clostridia. Yeah, a lot of bacterial overgrowth as well, a lot of dysbiosis. So we worked on him for about a year or so. And just based on some of the things that people say, they act like you can't fix this with natural medicine. And so I like to try to prove that wrong. And we did a lot of herbal antifungals with him up the nose and the gut. And then after a year, we retested the oat and everything was gone. And
Oh,
this kid had teachers writing, "What did you do? Like, this kid's amazing. He's not biting. He's not hitting kids anymore." Like, the violence was out of control in these kids. It makes me wonder how many teenagers are walking around with mold toxicity that are creating trouble.
more than people realize. I don't. The autism community is beginning to recognize that there is a mold toxicity component to many of the children, and that treating it often makes them much better. Um, and that extends not just to the spectrum, but also to kids with ADHD, kids who are acting out in school. And then we deal with younger adults who are having anxiety, OCD behaviors, depression, emotional outbursts. And mold is very well known to do that. And a high percentage of people who get mold will have it. So I would say very simply that anyone who has a new onset psychological diagnosis, you should be looking for mold toxicity.
Yeah, well said. I want to hit a couple other quotes from your book that I liked here. You talked about a U.S. study that over 11% of people reported an increased sensitivity to common chemicals. This would mean in the U.S. alone, perhaps 30 million people or more are experiencing some form of chemical sensitivity to some degree. And as you know, the numbers are probably way higher. What about the people they didn't survey? I mean, it seems like a lot. You know what? When I go out in public and I smell someone's scented laundry detergent, I'm amazed that people still use that crap. But I guess maybe the majority of the population is still asleep. Maybe like you and I living in more of a natural way in a natural health bubble, we assume that everybody's switched over to at least free and clear unscented stuff. But it still seems like the majority of people have no idea that they're poisoning themselves with these fragrances.
If you use fragrances or any smell, over a very short period of time, you actually become unaware of it so that you can't smell what other people are smelling. So, like you, if I'm walking around in public and someone has used a strong fragrance, I'm walking in the other direction. Or smoking, for example. If smokers could smell what I'm smelling, I'm not sure how many of them would be smoking, but I don't think they can. So they're not aware of how they are presenting to the rest of the world, um, because there's a numbing effect. We get used to it. It's kind of like if you've been on vacation and you walk back into your house, you may notice a particular smell in your house when you come back in. And within, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, you don't even notice it anymore. Um, it's, we're just not aware of what we're constantly being exposed to.
Yeah, this is a funny little story. I was on a date with my wife last night. We had the windows down in the car. We had the sunroof down. We're on a little 2-lane country road here in a beach town, and there's a golf cart in front of us with a bunch of people on it. And this woman, you could see her hair flowing in the wind. She had so much perfume on. We could smell her perfume from literally 100 feet behind her. Luckily, we were able to find a passing zone and pass this lady, but I cannot believe someone could have that much fragrance on. You could smell it behind like a trail of smoke. It was incredible. Now, this is all creating mast cell activation. Now, not in everyone, right? But sensitized people that maybe have pre-existing mold toxicity, Lyme, Bartonella, Babesia, anything that's pissing off these mast cells, that fragrance is just another trigger to the mast cell. Is it fair to say that?
Yeah, not only fair, absolutely correct. Chemical sensitivity has exploded in this country and worldwide. There was a study done in England recently in which they determined that 1% of the English population was so disabled by their chemical sensitivity that they were actually receiving disability for it. And obviously, to a lesser extent, so it was estimated that 35%, not estimated, the study showed that 35% of the English population had some degree of sensitivity, enough that it was in some way hampering people's lives. So we're not talking about something rare now. We're talking about something that is super common and will get more common as we are just unaware of what we're all being exposed to.
I could be wrong, but I feel like the tide is turning. I mean, you're probably not on social media much, are you?
No, you're correct.
Okay. So there's a lot of younger people. You'd be impressed. A lot of younger people, say ages 16 to 25-ish, that are really starting to trend more towards natural health. They're becoming aware of microplastics, the dangers of drinking single-use water bottles, the dangers of using artificial fragrances. So I think, even though I think there's a lot of downsides to social media and people being exposed to a lot of things and jealousy and envy and greed and all these emotions that it stirs up, it does appear to me, at least in my little bubble of the internet, that the younger people are waking up. Even at the gym just a couple of days ago, I talked to some young guys that were 19 years old. They were eating 100% organic. They were taking methylated B vitamins. They even knew about binders, and they had just heard about it from various podcasts and such. So I think the tide is turning. I just don't know if it's fast enough before our population collapses.
It has to be. Forgive me, I'm an optimist. We have to wake up, and if you don't mind the pun, come to our senses
Yeah.
um, as soon as possible.
Yes, well said. So, in terms of mold, another highlight from your book here, it's estimated that 10 million people have some degree of mold toxicity. I think it's maybe 10x that. It's rare. Now, I know it's not fair for me because I'm biased, but it's rare for me to see somebody that has a clean mycotoxin report.
Um, the estimate was given to me by Michael Gray, who's a physician who's been prominent in the mold world, published a bunch of papers. Some of the earliest papers were written by Michael, and he did some research showing that it was estimated that about 10 million Americans. Now, Michael told me this 8 years ago, so it
Mm.
is distinctly possible that the number is higher. I think the message I was trying to communicate is the things that I was talking about, like mold toxicity, isn't rare. It isn't, oh, I'm never going to get it because I don't know anyone who's ever had it and it's not around. Oh, I am absolutely certain you know people who've had it. They may not know they've had it, but you have met them and you know them. Um, it is estimated that 25+% of all homes in the United States have a significant amount of mold in them.
Oh
So
yeah.
how are you going to avoid it? Now, if your immune system is particularly strong, you can be exposed and you can be in it and you can function at a very high level. You may not get mold toxicity. But if your immune system takes a hit, and that could be, as it was for millions of Americans, COVID, where the immune system really got overstimulated in a big time way, or it could be a surgery, a stressor in your life, a loss of a relationship, or a betrayal by someone, or abuse of some kind, or um, childbirth, or you name it. Any of these things that can weaken the immune system will be the straw that breaks that camel's back. And the mold that they've been exposed to now goes from being contained to out of containment. And now they can get sick in a wide variety of ways from that exposure.
Yeah, well said. And I mean, definitely COVID definitely flared up a lot of people. I mean, now I had to put that in my list of symptoms I can help with is a long haul syndrome because it turns out that a lot of those people, it looks like on paper at least, they've had pre-existing mold toxicity, they've had pre-existing Lyme, other co-infections, and that just finally broke them. Because we'll look at some of these cases, we'll see positive, we'll see off the chart levels, and there was no new exposure. They're in new construction that they've tested. They haven't had tick bites. They've been out in Arizona for the last decade. And I'm like, wow, I guess this truly just broke people, and they had all these dormant things simmering in there. And then all of a sudden, this virus and or the injection just cranked it up to boil.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Um, there is such a thing as long haul COVID, but I think that many people who think they have long haul COVID, actually, it unmasked the presence of Lyme and mold that they had had as their immune system weakened, and now it is full blown. And the symptoms look so similar to long haul COVID that I think it's not being correctly diagnosed and hence not being correctly treated, because we can treat Lyme and we can treat mold toxicity. So
Yeah,
um, there's a test that people can do from Bruce um, Patterson at Radiance Laboratory, which is a 14-panel cytokine test that can really clarify whether it is long haul COVID, where certain patterns of cytokines clearly show as long haul COVID, completely different patterns show Lyme disease. And Bruce and I have just started talking about being able to use that test to help figure out mold toxicity as well. So there's actually some science where you don't have to guess, well, is this long haul COVID or is it something that's been unmasked? We can actually test it and measure it.
that's cool. And is this done via blood?
Yeah, it's a blood test, and the laboratory that does it is Radiance Laboratories.
And is this available for patients to order? Practitioners can order it as well? Like, is it widely available, or is this like experimental?
It's not experimental at all. There are dozens and dozens of patients. Dr. Patterson was a uh, nationally renowned infectious disease specialist at Stanford for many, many years. When COVID hit, he realized that we needed better labs to be able to help our patients understand what was going on. So he developed some of these labs, and he has dozens and dozens of published papers documenting all of this. So it's published. Patients can order it on their own, but any physician can order it.
That's great. And the cool thing is, you're right about the symptom overlap. It certainly looks the same on paper, whether it's the shortness of breath, whether it's the chronic fatigue, the anxiety, the depression. One quote I want to highlight, which I loved in the book here, and then I want to mention a couple things about long haul and how I'm seeing the things that help that also help mold. But before we get to that, one thing you wrote here, page 26, what's crucial to understand is that anxiety and depression are consequences of sensitivity, not the cause. And when I look at, unfortunately, maybe 6 out of every 10 people that I see are on some sort of pharmaceutical anti-anxiety, antidepressant medication, but they still feel like garbage. That quote makes perfect sense. And I want to say it just one more time for people. What's crucial to understand is that anxiety and depression are consequences of sensitivity, not the cause. These people that are just chasing these mood issues, they're totally missing the thing that's making them anxious and depressed.
Absolutely. There are a few integrative psychiatrists who've recognized this, and they're testing their patients now for Lyme disease and for mold toxicity. And shock of shocks, a huge percentage of them have it and can be treated successfully. So, what they needed wasn't an antidepressant or a benzodiazepine. They needed to get the right diagnosis so they could be treated. And a key point, we'll probably come back to this later, is mold toxicity and Lyme disease trigger the sensitivity that this book is about, is what I call a trifecta. It's a composite of the interaction between a dysfunctional limbic system, a dysfunctional vagal system, and a dysfunctional mast cell activation system. Those three systems completely intertwine with each other. One of them is a cellular process, and the other two are specific areas of the brain that are inflamed by mold and Lyme. And when they become dysfunctional, will trigger these various symptoms that people get. So, in terms of anxiety and depression, which we started talking about, those are key symptoms of the limbic system being dysfunctional. And
Yeah.
the limbic system has two major areas that it will give us symptoms in. One are psychological, which includes anxiety, depression, OCD, depersonalization, derealization, mood swings, any symptoms in that category is limbic. So even if you are being treated with an antidepressant or similar medication, really look at your limbic system, because we have methods now for rebooting the limbic system more specifically. And so you can get some help by working in that area. Similarly, the vagal system gives different symptoms that are more related to the autonomic nervous system and to the whole gastrointestinal tract, because the vagus system controls intestinal motility. So virtually any intestinal symptom that you might have, be it gas, distension, bloating, abdominal pain, reflux, think vagal dysfunction. Temperature dysregulation, where you just can't get warm or you just can't get cold. Palpitations, a rapid heartbeat. Again, that is vagal in nature. So there's more, but that's a very simplistic way of saying a lot of symptoms that people might have, they don't realize it's being triggered very specifically, and we have treatments for that now. That's Evan, that's why I wrote the book. I just felt like we were having an epidemic. I didn't think there was anything like this to help people put all this information together. And so I literally asked 20 of my friends who are experts in this area to write chapters. So the beauty of it is it's not just Neil Nathan's opinion and thoughts, but we have some of the top people in the field writing chapters on their area of expertise, so that patients can learn, if they've gotten sensitive, what's causing it, and more important, how to treat it effectively.
Yeah, I like that because different people have different brains, and so some people are going to resonate with certain chapters better than the other. Where some are just going to look like gibberish to you, and you're just going to scroll right past it if you're on the Kindle. Whereas other chapters, it slowed me down. I'm like, oh man, this is getting me somewhere. So one of the chapters about the limbic system, I'd like to read a little quote here, which is, if you've experienced trauma. Now, when people say trauma, car wreck, abuse, it's like it's not always that. Even just what happened with COVID and the fear, that fear alone was highly traumatic to the limbic system. So I want to throw that out there. But viral, emotional, physical, or toxic exposures, you've tried various treatments, aka having a supplement graveyard, but you still find yourself suffering in a cycle of illness. Your limbic system may be stuck in a protective state, and you would likely benefit from retraining your brain. And I ignored the limbic system until I joined the Toxic Mold Summit with Dr. Margaret Christensen a few years ago. And I was really confident about some of these candida protocols and some of these before and after lab results that I had, but I was still suffering myself, and I had dizziness so bad it was difficult for me to drive. And Margaret said to me, she said, Evan, if you don't address your limbic system, I don't care how good the protocol is, the binders, the this and that, you won't get better. And it hit me. And I thought, she's right. And so I interviewed Ashok. We talked about the program. We did some DNRS talk as well. But it wasn't until I started doing the nightly brain retraining meditations that I was actually able to drive again, go into buildings, react less to fragrances. So I was just in denial of it, I guess, because I was such a high charging person, and I want to help people. And so for me to have to slow down and meditate was a distraction, because I needed to hurry up and get back to being a dad and helping people. And I got to respond to these emails. It was, I did it because I had to get miserable enough to listen, I guess, is really what happened. And I think a lot of people are on their way to rock bottom. Maybe they don't know if or if they're there to rock bottom, but I encourage people to try and not wait before you're that stuck in a hole before you start implementing some of these therapies.
Well said. And I think so many people don't understand it's not a luxury to work on the limbic system if you've gotten chronically ill. Your body won't let you respond to the treatments for the more specific triggers like mold or Lyme disease until it feels safer. That means that you need to do some limbic and vagal retraining and to work on the mast cell activation if your body's going to be able to respond to how to heal you. And that is one of the main messages of this book, which is You need to understand what those systems are and how to work with it. Work with someone who is aware of these issues so that you can get back on the right road. I mean, so many people will go, "Oh, great! Now I have mold toxicity. It's measured, so I'm going to tank up on binders." And they start taking large amounts of clay and charcoal and chlorella, and they tank. It makes them horrible because if you're not taking the right dose of binder, it can mobilize mold toxin faster than your body can process it, and you're literally going to get more toxic. And this happens to a lot of people. And I've had too many consultations with these patients where they said, "Well, my doctor said, just fight your way through it. It's okay. Fight your way through it." You can't do that. You're just getting more toxic. This isn't something you can fight your way through. You have to listen to your body about what it wants, how much it wants, so that it will guide you through this. This isn't the process of, okay, I'll just tank up. I know I feel terrible, but if I keep doing this, then I will get through this tunnel. No, in this case, the light at the end of that tunnel is an oncoming train. So you really need to be in touch with your body and listen to it, because this is not a simple process of just following our algorithm. You have to be listening to your body the whole way through.
Yeah, well said. And it's frustrating for practitioners to try and convey this message to their clients and patients because you've seen people online, they're making millions of dollars with this idea of a 21-day detox. Like if I hear that, it's like, my God. And in the book, there's different opinions, different practitioners here, but 2 to 6 years is a realistic time frame. But when you tell people that and you drop that ball on them, it's very hard for them to swallow. So I'll often say, hey, look, we're going to say 6 months. And then when we get to 6 months, we'll say another six. Then when we get to a year, we'll say another year. And I find people can handle that bite-sized information. But unfortunately, marketing and just the quick fix culture, we just don't, as Americans, maybe global, but at least Americans, we don't have enough patience to comprehend the level of time and complexity it takes to peel back the layers of this onion. And this idea of a 21-day or a 3-month detox, it's just not realistic. And in fact, there was a clinic in Florida somewhere. I don't know the exact place or location or name. We won't drop it on him, even if I did know it. But apparently, it's a guy, he's a medical doctor, who is promoting basically a weekend detox where you go in and he will completely detox you of mold and mycotoxins in a weekend. And I saw a female that came from that practice, basically disabled. And I dove into some of the protocols, and it sounds like it was just extremely high dose IV glutathione was the main provoking agent, which you and I talked about, I believe, last time. Glutathione doesn't even sound like a mandatory piece of a protocol because most people can't handle much of it.
Well, most of my sensitive patients can't handle it. No, I think I know which clinic it is, and I will not mention the name. Um, over the years, people have asked me to teach them an algorithm for how to treat mold toxicity, and I flat out refused. So, because each person is biochemically and genetically unique. There, I know if I were to teach an algorithm, it would be applied indiscriminately to everyone. And yes, it would help some people, and I know it would hurt a whole lot of people. So it's just we can't think of this type of treatment as anything but individualized. And you're absolutely right about how long it takes. What I usually told patients in my office was, this is going to take at least a year, and you didn't hear the words "at least."
That's right.
Um, so, but like you, I also said, but we're talking about complete healing, which is entirely possible. You will get slowly and steadily better as we follow along here. And you've been feeling so bad for so long that the vast majority of the people that I've worked with have been grateful for each step along the way as they get better, which is, does it take a lot of time? It does. Is it worth it? The vast majority of folks that I've worked with would resoundingly say absolutely.
Especially for the men that have erectile dysfunction from mold toxicity, right? If they could just get their sex life back, they're happy. You think it's just the nitric oxide issue affecting, there's a hypercoagulability issue, I suppose. I mean, how many guys are on Viagra and Cialis that maybe just have mold, Lyme, other things creating hypercoagulability?
There's that, and the there is a direct effect of mold toxin on the pituitary, which interferes with the body's ability to make adequate amounts of testosterone. So there's that also.
So, do you think that just healing the mold toxicity is enough to help that? Or if people have suffered for this for, let's say 2, 3 decades, they've suffered with mold toxicity, they're actually going to need testosterone replacement in their 20s and their 30s, these younger guys?
I would argue against testosterone replacement in young people. Um, the body has a feedback loop so that if you're actively taking testosterone, even if you need it, the body goes, oh, you already got all the testosterone you need, so I'll stop making it in that feedback loop. And I've seen way too many young people who were put on testosterone, not by me, um, really have to work hard. It took them years to get back online with their body's own ability to make testosterone again. So if we're dealing with a young person, rather than take testosterone, I would strongly recommend that they use Clomid. Clomid is a medication that increases luteinizing hormone, which stimulates the body to make testosterone. But because it isn't testosterone, we don't have the feedback loop. And so you can elevate your testosterone levels with a little bit of Clomid, 25 milligrams 3 times a week, and at least get back online with it while you're getting the mold out of your system or improving circulation.
Yeah, I take a lot of different adaptogenic herbs too. So, Douglas Labs, they make a product that's great. We've used it for years called Testo Gain. We've had good results with that in men and women. This is like horny goatweed, maca, tribulus. They're almost, in a way, almost like plant-based testosterone supports. We've had
Mhm.
good success with those too. And it seems like across the board, I'm seeing guys as young as 22, 23 years old with a testosterone level of a 350. I mean, it's pretty crazy. Erectile dysfunction at age 20, it's pretty nuts.
I don't think people realize that this is more common than you think. Um, if you grow up in a moldy home, and so many people have said, "Well, I live in a new condo. I can't possibly have mold toxicity." And we'll go, "Well, um, did you always live in that condo, or had you ever been living in a place where you either saw mold or had water damage?" They'd say, "Well, I grew up in a, I lived in my room in the house was the basement, and there was, black mold growing in the basement. Do you think that? But that was years ago. Could that possibly still be in my system?" Yep. The mold could have colonized, so it's still making mold toxin for you. And again, we talked about it could be latent in you. Your immune system may have been able to fend it off, but again, if you take a hit of some type, and then it becomes manifest.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to circle back because I mentioned it earlier. Now it's coming back to me. So the things I'm seeing in long haul syndrome appear to be helping a lot of these mold Lyme co-infection people as well. Things like ivermectin, which has probably 20 different mechanisms: the antiviral, anti-inflammatory, maybe even fungal and anti-parasitic properties. Also, I don't know if you've come across this yet, but the transdermal nicotine patch has
Mhm.
been incredible. Have you been talking with anybody about this or recommending that?
I have. We've discussed that in my mentorship program. Jill Krista brought that up for all of us because the receptors that the spike protein mess with, I think, are the same receptors that nicotine can block. So there are quite a few of our members have commented on when patients went on a nicotine patch, not even starting with a whole one, like starting with a quarter of a patch and then working their way up. That's been helpful. Ivermectin is also capable of dissolving spike protein. So again, it has that as an added mechanism. And I would add to what you're describing, nattokinase is also able to help get rid of spike protein. So there are ways of getting the effects of the vaccinations and the effect of COVID out of your system so that you would be less at risk for having an immune issue.
I couldn't believe how well the nicotine patch worked. It was a 7 milligram for me, which was like considered the stage three, one of the lower doses available. I would say within 3 to 4 hours of having the patch on, my energy levels and my brain clarity tripled. I mean, I remember carrying one of my youngest babies up a flight of stairs. Normally, I'd get to a top of flight of stairs and think, "Oh, I've been running on the beach." You know, it's normal to be somewhat winded and out of breath. You're carrying heavy stuff, carrying a kid. But I got to the top of those stairs, and I felt like I could have ran a marathon. My endurance was massively increased with that. So I don't regularly do it, but I had run through about maybe 9 or 10 patches, and it was an absolute game changer.
Yeah, once it's done its job, you don't have to stay on it. But for a lot of people who do have some COVID exposure, be it by vaccine or be it by having had COVID multiple times, there's a rare American who hasn't had COVID somewhere along the line.
Yeah,
Now, many of us, it didn't affect our immune system that way. That's been the case for me. But for other people, I think the nicotine patch is an excellent and underutilized method for helping these folks to heal.
cool. So we talked about the limbic system. We may have hit this last time on the podcast, but I want to just throw it across your desk again and see if and what you've seen. But psychedelics, in particular psilocybin. I've done ketamine. You wrote about ketamine in your toxic book, which was great. I've recommended it to many people. Many people have credited it for saving their life from the suicidal thoughts they had from Lyme, Bartonella, mold, these heavy, heavy, intrusive thoughts. Even young guys in their 20s, I've had moms write letters saying, "Thank God that you recommended we check out ketamine because it saved my son's life." So I wanted to just tell you thanks for that, because I'm sharing this and putting it out into the work I'm doing. And there's several papers that have done functional MRI studies on psilocybin coming from psychedelic mushrooms. There may
Mhm.
be other compounds out there that have psilocybin, but particularly mushrooms, and how it literally changes the amount of blood flow that goes to the amygdala. And I'm having tons of reports. There's some places in the US now where it's decriminalized, which it's crazy that it was ever criminalized, but this is a natural compound that appears to help you to rewire the limbic system. And as of last week, there was even a new paper saying for chronic pain, potentially even chronic fatigue, this is basically unlocking these stuck neural pathways that keeps you in pain and keeps you in fatigue. So I just wanted to see what you've been seeing, if you've been hearing more things, or what your experience has been.
We have, for a number of years, microdosing of psilocybin or LSD has done something similar to ketamine IV. I think the IV ketamine is a more powerful treatment, especially for people who are more stuck. But I've had a number of patients respond really well to the microdosing. Now, there's a great chapter in my new book on this, by the way, written by Andreas Grossgold, who has a pain clinic down in Florida. He wrote a whole chapter on ketamine and also adds some of this microdosing work that we're talking about right now as another way to help reboot not just the limbic system but also mast cell activation. It can have remarkable effects on just changing the body's chemistry very quickly.
That's awesome. Yeah, maybe I haven't made it to that chapter yet. I think I was like 300 something into the 718 pages
No,
according to my
it's
Kindle app.
I think it's the next to last chapter in the book.
Okay. So I'm not quite there yet, but that's great to hear, because I experienced tremendous benefit with psychedelics. Ketamine was one of them. I would say after one dose of ketamine, my chemical sensitivity was decreased by at least 60%, 60.
Hmm.
One dose of IV.
You have a lovely responsive system that works great. Now, I have seen it before. I have seen one or two treatments make profound differences. More people need a few more treatments. Most clinics that do this offer like 6 treatments, in which you'll get either 2 treatments a week for 3 weeks or 1 treatment a week for 6 weeks. And this literally reboots the limbic vagal and mast cell issues for many of those people.
Yeah, well said. I end up doing a whole series and then a couple of boosters since then. I've probably done 8 or 9 sessions now. I feel like It could be somewhat of a distraction for people as well if you're still not addressing the underlying environmental toxicity, or maybe you're slacking on your binders or something like that. I did find myself slipping a couple times back into old thought patterns and reactivity and certain sensitivities to fragrances. So I think it's another tool. You've got to just I think some people went so far into it that they think it's just going to erase everything else. And it's like, well, ketamine's not pulling mold out of you. It's just changing maybe how you respond to these high levels in you.
All of these things need to be looked at in a more complicated way because they are more complicated. It isn't that simple. So I don't view ketamine as a cure. I view ketamine as a fabulous way to restore safety in the body so that patients can respond way better and more effectively to the treatment for mold and Lyme that they actually need. So there are a handful of people that um, will respond to either limbic retraining or vagal retraining or mast cell treatment and get well from that alone. And those folks, I know they have a voice in chat rooms and things like, oh, you don't need to do any of those treatments. Just do your limbic retraining or just do this. That's true for a very few number of people. The vast majority of people, it will be a wonderful adjunct to help get them going down the right road, but you're going to need to do more to get well.
Yeah, me personally, I was too stuck. I tried brain retraining. I did DNRS. I did Ashok's program. I started doing all these meditations. It helped take the edge off, but I was so stuck. I needed that extra boost. And when you've got smooth jazz on, you've got your eye mask on, you're sitting back in a comfy recliner chair, you got a kind nurse taking care of you and checking you out. It's a wonderful thing. And I actually got a clinic locally to change some of their protocols. They were putting everyone on Zofran, and they were doing forget what it was. It might have been some sort of a beta blocker. And I said, well, why not do ginger instead? And so now the clinic is pushing ginger.
Versed.
They did some Versed as well, but there might have
Right.
even been another compound they were using. And I just said, well, how about motherwort for the blood pressure elevation? And so I got them to now carry motherwort tincture. We do 5 drops pre-session, and we do a chewable ginger. And they've basically eliminated the need for Zofran in the clinic. I showed them a paper just for fun. I printed out Zofran versus ginger paper, handed it to them. And they're like, this is cool. And so we've actually reduced the pharmaceutical use a little bit. The only downside for me is pretty dizzy afterwards. I mean, it wears off, but man, I
Right.
was
Yep.
trouble.
What dose did you use?
About 1 milligram per kilogram.
Wow, that's much higher than I normally go. Um, I usually, I'm working mostly with really sensitive people, not that you're not one, but um, that is a higher dose than I would have started with. I typically start people on 25 milligrams IV to start with, and then we can nudge that up based on their comfort level and their response. And I have a few really sensitive patients that I'll start them on 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams, partly because their limbic system is so afraid of anything that they need to be reassured that, okay, I can do this. This is not going to bother me at all. This is very comforting. So, again, the dose you started on wouldn't have been typical in my world.
Yeah, that was
Um,
the end. That was the ending dose. I did start around 20, 25, 30, 35. We ramped up. I think I maxed out somewhere around 70 milligrams. But yeah, I did ramp up. And I'm glad that you're calling this out, which is that even something as amazing as this therapy could be perceived as a threat to someone that's sick. And so I just want people to visualize this, that you could have the perfect protocol, the perfect brand new supplement, this probiotic, this binder, all these magical things you might hear about. But if you're stuck like this, even that amazing healing nutrient could be a threat to your limbic system. And that's tough. That's tough to beat.
that's the limbic system talking. The limbic system's trying to protect you. It's not trying to hurt you, but
Hmm.
it's basically going something like, I don't know. Every couple of things you've tried here have backfired, so I'm not going to let you do that because I'm going to scare you into not allowing yourself to even contemplate doing that. That's actually how the limbic system works. It is trying to keep you safe by giving you symptoms like fear and anxiety that will keep you from doing something that it doesn't want you to do. Now, keep in mind, this is not psychological. This is neurological. People with a limbic system like this have been slowly wired over the years to feel like more and more threats from more and more stimuli, and it's just trying to protect you.
Yeah, I know we got a couple minutes left, but I want to share one quick story, then ask you an ending question here. So, when I first had COVID, I lost my sense of smell completely. My taste was semi gone. And I went out with my wife. We went over to a breakfast restaurant. I remember ordering some steak. We're sitting out on this patio. We're waiting for our food to come. And there's a woman sitting behind us that had the most awful perfume smell ever. And my wife looks at me with these eyes, she gives me the look like, do we move? Like, do you smell that? I had no sense of smell, but here's the crazy thing. I had no reactivity to that perfume at all. Historically, it could have been heart palpitations, maybe a spike in blood pressure. It could have been anxiety. It could have been headache. Who knows? All sorts of weird MCS like symptoms. I had zero reactivity at all. And then I knew it was in quote in my head, not that I was a crazy person, but that I had wired my limbic system to treat these perfumes like a threat. And that day when I
Well,
couldn't smell it, I was fine.
I hope you're not suggesting that we should all go out and get COVID who have chemical sensitivities, so that it will cure our chemical sensitivities by not letting ourselves know that we're being exposed to chemicals that would otherwise bother us.
Not at
I
all.
mean,
That'd be
I,
incredibly dangerous with
I,
gas
I,
leaks and yeah.
I just said that for amusement. I know you would never,
Yeah.
ever think that thought.
It is scary to think about, the permanent damage to the olfactory bulb and the potential issues with the blood-brain barrier being compromised and all that. But it was definitely a fascinating experience for me to go through that after had chemical sensitivity for a couple of years at that point. And then all of a sudden it was turned off until I started doing things to mitigate the spike. And all of a sudden the smell came back online. With the smell came some of the sensitivities, which I continued to work through. So just
Yeah,
wanted to share that. Now, for
there's a direct
people.
connection between the olfactory, the first cranial nerve is the olfactory nerve. It comes right down into here, so that something you smell literally goes, that stimuli goes right to the limbic system almost instantly. So for people who are chemically sensitive, they can react in seconds to something that they are smelling.
Yeah, which is insane. What would be if you had just one top remedy, therapy, tool, device, drug, compound, supplement for the chemical sensitivity? What if you could only have one tool on the desert island, what would it be?
Um, I think the number one thing for chemical sensitivity is some kind of limbic retraining. And whether we did Ashok Gupta's amygdala retraining program or any Hopper's dynamic neural retraining program, one that I like a lot these days is Primal Trust by Kathleen King. But some get hold of a limbic retraining program and really do it daily, not an hour a day, which is often recommended by the folks doing that, but 20 minutes a day. That would be my number one treatment for chemical sensitivity.
Yeah, I think it's realistic and doable. Put your kids to bed, put the headphones on, and get to work. So, well, thank you so much. We'll send people back. We'll put links to the book on Amazon. I'm sure they could probably order it directly from you as well on your website, or is Amazon the best place?
No, order it directly from Amazon. That's the easiest place to get it. A number of other major booksellers also carry it. And I had a couple of reviews of the book, which is otherwise very well reviewed. We actually sold out our first printing within 2 weeks. Had to scramble to get more books out, and they're now available. But a couple of people have written who are very chemically sensitive that they were very frustrated that when they opened the book, it set off their chemical sensitivity. Because, sorry, folks, there is no printing ink that is incapable of doing that. It doesn't exist. So it's not that we didn't do due diligence about having some magical printing ink that wouldn't cause that. So if that's the case, number one, get it as an ebook. Okay, it will be available as an audiobook fairly soon. And if you do want to get the book, order it, get it, and then off gas it for a couple of weeks, and then you'll be able to read it. So I don't want anyone to get sick from the book.
Yeah, well
But
well said,
then,
and the Kindle's so easy anyway. I mean, you could type in I like the Kindle better because you could type in a word like anxiety and you go straight to that section, or you could type in mold, you go straight to that section. So I kind of prefer the Kindle experience anyway. But yeah, I did see a couple reviews here bringing down your average rating. So people go give Dr. Nathan a good 5-star review. If you love this book, it's on Amazon. Looks like it's already a bestseller in toxicology, sensitive patients healing guide. So thanks so much and great to see you again and glad you're doing well. Keep on going.
okay, thank you, Evan. Good to see you again. And thanks for the opportunity to share this with your audience.
Oh, my pleasure.